Good afternoon. Thank all of you for being here today. I'm Jason Salazar, Chief of the Visalia Police Department. Joining me here today for this press conference is Tulare County District Attorney Tim Ward, who will be speaking today about the charges filed in this case and use of technology that led us to this arrest. And also with us today is Nickey Duane, the Assistant Director for the Bureau of Forensics from the California Department of Justice. We can talk about some of the technology that was used as well. I'm going to start the press conference this afternoon with an overview of this case, which is a series of sexual assaults that occurred 20 years ago here in the city of Visalia. And after I provide that overview, DA Ward will then take the mic and speak about the charges filed in this case and additional information, and you'll also hear from Assistant Chief Duda about their role. Yesterday, our investigative team arrested 52-year-old resident Nickey Stane in relation to a series of sexual assaults that occurred in the city of Visalia between 1999 and 2002. Stane was taken into custody on a DNA John Doe warrant that was issued in 2009 by the Tulare County Superior Court. District Attorney Ward will speak further to that process in a few moments. Let me start by providing you with an overview of the series of crimes that the suspect has been arrested for and others he is suspected of having committed during the time frame that I've mentioned. Between July 1999 and August of 2002, a series of sexual assaults and assaults occurred in the city of Visalia. These crimes each had very similar suspect descriptions, each had similar and specific MOs as how the crime was committed, and the victims in these crimes were also very specific and similar. There were a total of 7 assaults that occurred during the time period that we believe were committed by the same suspect. 4 of those incidents were so similar and specific in nature that they were included in the John Doe arrest warrant for these crimes that were issued in 2009. Although the other 3 are not charged, we do believe that the suspect is responsible for those crimes as well. In one of the 4 cases that was charged, DNA was obtained from the crime scene, and the DOJ lab in Fresno was able to analyze that sample and provide a specific DNA profile of the suspect in that crime to the Visalia Police Department that became the basis for the John Doe warrant. Nickey Stane was arrested yesterday on that warrant, and search warrants were served here in the city of Visalia, and he is now in custody for those crimes. I'll provide a brief overview of each of these crimes that you see on the screen there to give you an idea of what this suspect, the crimes he committed. The first one occurred on Friday, July 30th, 1999 at about 11:40 p.m. in the area of Walnut and San Joaquin here in Visalia. On that night, 19-year-old female victim was riding her bike home from work, westbound along Walnut Avenue near San Joaquin Street, when she sees a suspect approaching her direction, and at that time he impeded her travel on the bike and brandished a black handgun. He forced the victim to a side street and behind a vehicle and some bushes, and at the same time there was another male and female who were walking in the area, and he threatened the victim that if she made any noise or said anything, he would harm her. The suspect then forced the victim to her knees and began to fondle her breasts under her shirt. He exposed himself and also masturbated while fondling her breasts until he ejaculated there at the crime scene. The suspect told the victim that he could shoot her from a distance if she tells anyone and eventually lets her go. The victim rode her bike home and reported the incident to family and ultimately to the police department, and officers responded to investigate. When they responded to the area, they were able to locate the crime scene and obtain evidence from the scene that would eventually result in the collection of a DNA sample from this unknown suspect. That evidence, as I mentioned, was submitted to the DOJ lab in Fresno, who located DNA and provided that DNA profile for our suspect. On Sunday, September 26, 1999 at 7:35 p.m. in the area of Church and School Streets in Visalia, an 18-year-old female victim was walking home from work in the downtown area, there at North Church Street, approaching school. She observed a male subject walking towards her. She felt uncomfortable and threatened by his presence, and so she tried to cut through a dirt field to avoid him. However, he was able to cut her off. At that time, he pulled a sweatshirt over his face and drew the hood around his face, placed a handgun to her side, and told her to come with him. He then forced her to some nearby bushes, where he concealed themselves behind those bushes. He then forced the victim to unbutton her shirt and began to fondle her breast with his hands and eventually with his penis as well. The suspect then demanded that the victim orally copulate him, but she refused and resisted in his attempts to force her to do so. He became agitated and ultimately allowed her to leave, and she responded and reported this to the police. On Tuesday, April 3rd, 2001 at 10 p.m. in the 1900 block of East Mineral King, a 21-year-old victim was at the Visalia bus depot there on East Mineral King waiting alone for a ride. She then saw a suspect walking on Mineral King and eventually directly up to her. He pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his head and drew it tight around his face, removed a black handgun from his pocket and pointed it at her. He initially forced the victim behind the bus depot, but there was too much light, and he then took her across the street behind another building. At that location, the victim was attempting to see the suspect's face. He became upset with her and told her not to look at him or he would shoot her, and then ultimately he fled the scene. On Friday, October 26, 2001, at 0645 hours in the 400 block of West Grove in Visalia in an alleyway, a 17-year-old female victim was walking west on Grove Street at West Street on her way to Redwood High School when she noticed a male suspect walking in front of her in the same direction. The suspect turned and saw the victim and continued to walk westbound and then ultimately out of the victim's view. As the victim approached a nearby alleyway, the suspect confronted the victim there, brandished a black handgun, and had the hood of his sweatshirt pulled tight around his face. The suspect told the victim to come with him, and out of fear she did so, and he then forced the victim into an alleyway, concealing their location behind a pole and some bushes. The suspect then unzipped his pants, removed his penis, and forced her to orally copulate him. When finished, the suspect told the victim to count to 100 and that he would be watching her and hunt her down if she didn't comply. She did so and eventually did notify authorities of the crime. Friday, January 4th, 2002, 0635 hours in the 900 block of West Murray, a 41-year-old female victim was standing at a bus stop near this location waiting for a bus to go to work. The male suspect approached the victim from an unknown location and came from behind her suddenly, at which time he brandished a dark-colored handgun while wearing a sweatshirt that was pulled tight around his face, the hood pulled tight around his face. She attempted to flee, but he threatened her not to run or he would kill her, and so she stayed out of fear for her life. The suspect then demanded that the victim open her jacket and lift her shirt over her breast. She complied with his demands and he began to fondle her breast. He then fled the scene without saying another word to the victim. Sunday, January 27th, 2002 at 0625 hours in the 500 block of South Mooney, a 20-year-old female victim arrived at that location early for work and parked her vehicle near the business. She was sitting in the vehicle when she saw a male suspect come out from behind a storage shed and approach the passenger side of her car, wearing a hooded sweatshirt drawn tight around his face. The suspect motioned to the victim to roll her window down, but she was very scared and did not comply with his commands. He then pulled a handgun out of his pocket and brandished it towards her, tapping the window, telling her to roll the window down. She then placed the vehicle in reverse and fled the scene and called the police department. And finally, on Friday, August the 23rd of 2002 at 8:42 p.m. in the 100 block of North Conyer, two 17-year-old female victims were walking near Conyer and Center Streets when they saw a male subject walking in a direction towards them. Victims noticed that the suspect had what looked like a bandana around his neck that he pulled up over his face, and as he approached the victims, he brandished a handgun and then told the two victims to show him their breasts. One of the victims complied with the suspect's command, at which time he then fled on foot. The victims ran to a nearby phone and notified the police. We believe that there are probably other crimes that have some similarities to the 7 that I just mentioned to you that may also be linked to Nick Stane's crimes that he committed here between 1999 and 2002. And this is a case that generated a good deal of attention during the time. Obviously, it struck fear in the heart of women who were walking in areas of Visalia. And at one time, there was a $50,000 reward that was out for information leading to the suspect's arrest. As you've heard in the description of these crimes, the MO of these crimes and the suspect description suggested that the crimes were linked and being committed by the same suspect. The general description provided on each of these was that of a white male, approximately 30 years of age, anywhere from 5'6" to 6 feet in height, and slender or medium build. He used a black handgun in the commission of the crimes that was brandished towards his victims. In all but one of the cases, the victims were in their late teens or early 20s, and you heard that one of the victims was 41 years of age. The suspect typically used a hooded sweatshirt drawn tight around his face to conceal his identity, and on one occasion used a bandana to cover his face. All of these crimes occurred within that 3-year span of 99 to 2002 here in Visalia. The sexual assaults of the victims were also all similar in nature. The suspect would force the victim to expose her breasts, fondle the breasts, attempted or forced oral copulation, and masturbated during several of the crimes. Over the course of this 20-year investigation, numerous leads have been exhausted, numerous persons contacted by investigators, and numerous suspects ultimately eliminated as potential suspects. Several investigators have worked diligently over these years in attempts to solve these cases. The most key piece of evidence was obtained by the officers on the first crime scene in the series in July of 1999. And that evidence, as I mentioned, yielded a DNA sample that, when analyzed by the DOJ lab in Fresno, provided an STR profile or DNA profile of the suspect responsible for this crime. Over the years, numerous DNA databases have been searched for a match to the DNA profile in this case, with no matches. Technological advances in recent years and our experience and involvement with the investigative techniques used in the Golden State Killer case last year helped to focus the scope of this investigation and develop a new lead. Through that technology, the use of traditional investigative techniques, and through surveillance, the investigative team was able to identify a suspect in this investigation. A DNA sample was obtained from that suspect, and the DOJ lab was able to confirm a match of that suspect to the DNA profile obtained in this investigation back in '99. Yesterday, members of our investigative team arrested him on the John Doe arrest warrant that was based on that profile. And again, he's been identified as Nickey Duane Stane. He's a 52 years of age and a Visalia resident. This arrest is a culmination, again, of 20 years of work of members by our investigative team to ensure that justice was ultimately served for the victims of these crimes. This suspect, Nickey Stane, committed horrific crimes on his female victims in this community, and today he is in custody for those crimes. I want to commend and thank all of the members of our investigative team, past and present, who have been persistent over the years in their efforts to solve this case. Most recently, Detective Sorensen and our Violent Crimes Unit, Detective Brian Somavia, have worked hard in this case during its final chapter. And I do want to recognize another one of those investigators specifically who worked very hard in this case over the years, is responsible for authoring the warrant that would be issued for the DNA profile in this case, preserving our ability to continue to pursue justice and closure for these victims, and that's retired Visalia Police Lieutenant Steve Pewter. So thank you, Steve. With that, I will turn the mic over to Tulare County District Attorney Tim Ward, who can speak further to the John Doe warrant, technology used to aid in this case, and the charges that have been filed against the suspect, Nickey Stane, today.
Thank you, Chief. If you'll bear with me just for a moment. In the early 2000s, prosecutors in my office worked closely with the detectives from the Visalia Police Department, and all were committed with one goal, and that was to reach the point where we are today. While a DNA profile was obtained in August of 2000, the name, the identity, and the location of that perpetrator remained anonymous for many years. Though the commitment of the investigative team would never waver, time was not on our side. Based upon some of the potential charges that the investigation had uncovered, the applicable law at the time meant that action needed to be taken to preserve the right for us to seek justice in this case. Some of the crimes that are now charged had a maximum statute of limitations that would have told or expired after 10 years from the date of those crimes. On July 1st of 2009, the Office of the Tulare County District Attorney filed an 8-count felony complaint covering 4 separate incidents spanning a period of time, as the Chief mentioned, from July of 1999 to early January of 2002. The complaint has numerous special allegations, among which is an allegation that a firearm was used in each of the crimes. The complaint enumerated several violent sexual assault charges, such as felony sexual battery while the victim is restrained, kidnapping with the intent to commit oral copulation, and forced oral copulation. The complaint at the time, which I do believe we have a partial slide of, identified and listed the identity of the perpetrator as John Doe. It included a physical description along with that DNA profile. At the same time, a no bail arrest warrant was also issued, and this practice is commonly known as a John Doe case or a John Doe warrant. According to the records available to us today in my office, we believe that this was the first such John Doe case ever filed based upon a DNA profile in Tulare County. And I'm proud today to stand before you representing those dedicated prosecutors and announce that we have amended that 2009 complaint, which we will provide to you, to reflect the defendant's true name, and it was filed today. Justice can sometimes be a long and winding path and seem like a journey of 1,000 miles. But every journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. The first step to being here today, make no doubt, was based upon the dedicated police work from the moment these victims reported their crimes. And fortunately for all of us in this community, in this county today, the law enforcement team assembled never gave up. But along that journey, this fine police department and our office learned some lessons via our shared experience in the Golden State Killer case, as the chief mentioned. These new technologies we discovered have helped lead us and guide us to this place we are today. This is the next step in the search for justice. Now, I do not mean to compare the two defendants, but instead I seek to highlight the common experiences and the common lessons learned, and really the new and innovative technology and the techniques that were developed. The impact of crimes like this on victims and their families is twofold. First, the crime inflicted upon them and the harm done, but then the unsettling fact that the attacker was still out there. And what followed was a journey that for many, including the victims in this case, must have felt like a never-ending nightmare, and a journey which led to closed door after closed door. But the answer was, and will always be, in the DNA. Using the best practices developed by the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, the investigative team utilized that genetic genealogy practice to bring us here today. In this case, make no mistake, it is clear that genetic genealogy was the best, most effective investigative lead we had in over 20 years. But today is not a resolution, it's just another step in the pursuit of that justice. Make no mistake, we are fully committed in that pursuit, and we will not waver from that path. Now, I'm sure that everyone here has many, many questions about exactly how did we arrive here today. But please know that the accused in this case deserves a fair trial, and we are committed to ensuring the integrity of that process, and we cannot and we will not divulge any more specifics of what led us here today. To those of you watching at home, if you or someone you know have been a victim of a violent crime, know this: you are not forgotten. Please do not give up hope if your case has not been solved. As science and as technology evolve, the space for criminals to operate in our communities gets smaller and smaller. My prayer is that these doors of justice someday open for you as well. I would be remiss if I didn't extend my appreciation and gratitude to the men and women of the Visalia Police Department. You never gave up, you never forgot, and you continue to work diligently to bring this case to this point. To the staff of the Office of the District Attorney, I promise you I could not be more proud, more humbled by your work and your passion for justice. My final appreciation is directed to a team that is physically not in the room today, but with us in spirit. The Sacramento County District Attorney's Office deserves more credit than can be expressed. Ms. Schubert's commitment to train other offices, other law enforcement officers, her desire to establish the most effective use and best practice for this science, along with her staff's assistance in this continued fight for justice, carried us along this journey, and every man and woman in that office, deserves an immense credit. Knowing that the attacker was hiding in plain sight here in our city, we're all hoping that the no-bail warrant is honored and that the defendant will remain in custody. I had the privilege of speaking to a family member of one of our victims yesterday, and shared with me relief that the perpetrator is caught, and that relief is equal only to the hope that he will remain in custody and justice will finally be delivered. And to that end, I promise you, we are united. It's my honor right now and pleasure to introduce Assistant Director Nickey Duane.
Good afternoon. My name is Nickey Duane. I'm the Assistant Bureau Director for the Bureau of Forensic Services with the California Department of Justice. And to start, I'd like to acknowledge Chief Salazar and District Attorney Tim Ward. Thank you for your dedication in helping us to be a part of this success that we're dealing with right now. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the staff at the Department of Justice who, for years and years, did a lot of work on these cases. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge Fresno Laboratory Director Visalia Morales, Assistant Laboratory Director Caroline Garcia, Assistant Laboratory Director Scott Lewis, Senior Criminalist Johnny Upshaw, Senior Criminalist Mindy Crow, Senior Criminalist Laura Bailey Van Houten, retired Senior Criminalist Kenneth Penner, and all of the other staff at the Fresno and Richmond laboratories who worked on all of the cases that were brought before us over the years. Sexual assault is a serious crime that has no place in our society. It ruins lives, and nobody wants to see these cases go cold. Our office is constantly working to help our local partners build new leads in their investigations. Every week, we check new DNA evidence samples against a nationwide database of felony offenders and arrestees and DNA evidence from unsolved crimes. Those checks have generated over 85,000 investigative leads in California and beyond. In this case, our team was able to analyze evidence that was provided to us by our local partners, which helped to lead to today's announcement. That's why it is so crucial for us all to work together. We will continue to do our part to help to bring justice for California's families and communities. And we're very grateful for the dogged determination of local law enforcement partners who are on the front lines every single day. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd be happy to try and take some questions. As the DA mentioned, this is still an ongoing investigation. There are certain things we will not comment further about today, but we'll try to answer your questions as best we can.
Chief, can you say how long Nickey Stane has been a suspect?
That was a lead that was just developed recently, so within this past year.
So outside of the cases in the John Doe warrant, just want to clarify, the other 3 cases, is he going to be charged with those?
He will not be charged with those crimes. So the John Doe warrant specifically was filed on the four cases. We believe, based on MO and other characteristics, the other 3 and maybe some others are possibly related to him, but he's not being charged with those crimes.
Any recent crimes in recent years, like aside from the early 2000s, that could be related to him?
Not that we're aware of at this point, but obviously with new information, we will continue to investigate and be aware of potential other crimes, and certainly investigate those should they come to light.
Do you know if he's been in Visalia for the 2002 now?
He has been a longtime resident of the city of Visalia, so before these crimes were committed.
Have you had any recent interaction with him prior to this investigation in past years with Mr. Stane?
Nothing recent, no. Any other questions?
So in a case like this, not a return, do the victims have to testify?
That's certainly something that we will get to, yes, if the case proceeds to trial. In our system of justice, it is dependent upon victims and witnesses coming forward and testifying.
20 years ago does it make it tougher for your office?
Certainly, not just our office, every office in the state or any office that tries to prosecute a case of this age. As I said, time's not on our side. Memories fade, certainly, but we look at, in those cases, we look at the police investigation that secured photographs, secured documentation of what the crime scene looked like, and those things can be used to refresh memory, refresh recollection. And we have a tool in this case that does not dissipate over time, that will not erode, does not go away, and that's called DNA.
When is he expected to be arraigned, or has he already been?
Thanks, Brian. The question is, when is he expected to be arraigned? We believe that he will be arraigned tomorrow. I'm not exactly sure of the time. Based on the new Tulare County Superior Court schedule, I believe that arraignment will occur in the Porterville Courthouse. You know what, Brian? Our office, if we find out more information as the day develops, you may want to contact our office, and if we can, we'll provide you with as much information as we can.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you all for coming today, and appreciate you being here. Thank you.